Well, David, after some technical snafus, we're ready to begin our show today. David, I apologize. Normally today is Sunday with Charles, and what we wanted to do, you and I were speaking earlier this morning, and we haven't had a lot of reporting on Crowdsource the Truth just yet about this London Bridge attack that took place on Friday. I apologize, I'm still just getting the last little remnants of our thing ready here. See, part of the problem that I'm dealing with, David, is that as a one-man show and trying to make everything as economical as possible, the studio here, when I go mobile, it's all this stuff. And when you and I were speaking this morning, and you had raised the possibility that this might have been a hit, this might have been a targeted, high-value hit on the Cambridge law student rather than just a random act of terror, that intrigued me, but I had the studio totally disassembled, so I thought it might be nice. It was snowing lightly, and I had everything prepared to take you and our viewers up to Rockefeller Center, which would have been quite interesting in terms of provoking conversation about the Rockefeller family, but it also would have been very interesting to see the tree being built and all that. But along the lines of Murphy's Law, what can go wrong did. The sound was a disaster. It started raining. I couldn't get up there, and the whole thing fell apart. I was very stressed out. I apologize to you, David. I apologize to our viewers. And how are you this morning, David? Can you give us some insight into what we'll be discussing?
Well, totally. And if I may just say so, your language reminded me of my days in the oil industry on the rigs up in the Australian desert.
Hopefully none of that was broadcast.
Well, I hope so for your sake. But, it's fairly colorful, but every language and every situation requires a certain response. And I think you responded very appropriately. And just to remind the audience, I'm nearly double your age, so I wouldn't have even begun to attempt what you were doing. And also, before going on to what I think was a contract hit on London Bridge of a Mr. Jack Merritt, a Cambridge graduate, I just want to redefine my own job title, because lots of people say to me, what the hell are you doing with Jason Goodman? And I have to give them some kind of explanation that's fairly pithy, if that's the appropriate word. And so what I've drilled down to now is I consider myself to have become, painfully or otherwise, a public expert witness in courts of public opinion.
Right.
And the important thing about that is a court of public opinion is something that obviously operates outside the court, and it's a service, in my opinion, to the public, who are being fed absolutely junk science and fake news, and their heads are spinning. And in the particular case, what I hope today we might show that the murder of Jack Merritt on the London Bridge was actually a contract hit by some very powerful, very dangerous and sinister people. So just to remind me, I describe myself as a public expert witness in the courts of public opinion, and I don't charge for anything, but I would like to see, if people think I'm doing a good job, some money coming through the Patreon website, well, if it's a website, that's the right description, to reflect what the public would like to hear me talk about, because I think we have some of the most interesting analysis in crime scene investigation in the history of the media. And so let's launch into this poor guy, Jack Merritt.
If I may, David, I just want to elaborate on some of what you're saying, because, we're lucky enough to have with us today some of the viewers who may have expected to see Sunday with Charles, and I apologize to you as well, David, because I had hoped to provide a program for people tuning in at 3 p.m. who wanted to see that, and it just all got totally screwed up. Now, nothing ventured, nothing gained, but what we wanted to let the viewers of Sunday with Charles know is that you and I are creating a show every Friday, David, called Discovery CSI. You've got a website called Reverse CSI Scripts that people can visit. The Reverse CSI Scripts website is totally free, and people who are curious about who David Hawkins is and what he does and why he might choose to do broadcasts with me can visit this website and learn all about him. You can also see a playlist that contains all of the YouTube videos that David and I have done together. This video will be added to that once the broadcast is complete. But as you point out, David, Patreon has become a really important part of what we're doing here at Crowdsource the Truth. And people who don't like it will complain that we're putting information behind a paywall or whatever this is. This is not food. David and I are not keeping anything from anyone that they need. If people, as David said, enjoy this information, if they enjoy David's analysis, if they like watching Crowdsource the Truth, we invite them to sponsor the shows. And they can do that in the case of David Hawkins' Discovery CSI by going to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and becoming a sponsor. You can also watch on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. And what's really so interesting about this incident on London Bridge, David, is that it involves so many of the things that you've been speaking about on Discovery CSI for months and actually for years. You've spoken about the City and Guilds of London, which I think a lot of people, I certainly, knew nothing about before you brought it up. Can you give us, let's say in 2 minutes, David, an overview of the City and Guilds of London and how it fits into your view of this global conspiracy that involves SERCO, it involves the Clinton Foundation, it involves Epstein, all of these people. Tell us quickly what the City and Guilds of London is and how you see it being involved in the broader conspiracy.
Yeah, sure, that'll be a pleasure. So the City and Guilds Institute of London, I think, was formed in the 1880 period, and a particular branch, or if you will, a facility of the City and Guilds Institute of London was the City and Guilds Fellowship, where elite members of the city, and obviously the City of London goes back decades, to Roman times, and of course was instrumental in funding probably the greatest mercantile empire the world has ever seen, and financing, the London company that founded the Virginia colony in the United States. So absolutely fundamental to the growth of the free world.
Sorry to interrupt, David, but say that part again. The City and Guilds of London was instrumental in the formation of Virginia.
Well, they weren't called the City and Guilds Institute of London then, but the guilds of the City of London were instrumental in organizing a lottery where prestigious figures in the guilds or the livery companies of the City of London popped in some money and funded the first expedition of the Virginia Company to the United States, and basically the founding, or one of the founding colonies. And you probably know that when people put in money for a lottery, there's a certain promise made to them. And I think what was happening under the patent law of the United Kingdom at the time is the people who popped money into that investment got a perpetual license, and of course I hate to use that word, to exploit the Virginia colony, right? And when the War of Independence, there's so many, you'll have to pull me back from issues because I think they're all very exciting. When the people in the United States thought they got their independence, I don't think they calculated that as far as the City and Guilds of London, or the Guilds of London, or the livery companies of the City of London, they had rights in the Virginia colony in perpetuity, irrespective of the result of the War of Independence. And so,
what kind of rights did they have in Virginia, David? Because this is very interesting. I was not aware of this. Every time that we drill down on something, new information seems to come out. So what sort of rights do these investors have in Virginia?
When the King or the Queen of England grants a patent, that is to say the Crown, as patentor, grants rights to the patentee that may be in perpetuity. So I'm very confident that when the guilds or the livery companies of London funded the lottery, which financed, I think, the first 3 ships that went over to the United States carrying the immigrants and that sort of thing to found a colony, I believe those rights were granted in perpetuity by the Crown. So you guys think you had a War of Independence and you think you got shot of King George III or whatever it was, but I'm saying that the City and Guilds of London said, we still own you to this day.
Interesting.
That's pretty staggering.
It
So
is.
when we talk about the City and Guilds Fellowship, which I think was 1892 or something like that, a modern fellow of the City and Guilds Institute is a guy called Roy Gardner, who's the chairman of SERCO. So you can imagine that we can go down that particular rabbit hole if you want and talk about SERCO's role. But just to come back to the potential role in the contract killing of Jack Merritt, it's very interesting because there was a meeting in the Fishmongers Hall, which is one of the livery companies, the worshipful company of fishmongers. There was a meeting between Cambridge law graduates and ex-cons, which is a fascinating meeting when you think of it. And they were talking about reconciliation of prisoners that have gone through the legal system or the prison system. And I believe Mr. Jack Merritt was the coordinator of one of those programs. Evidently, he got up. Reminds me of Chris Hyman getting up at the windows of the World Breakfast meeting, but I digress. He must have got up, and one of the guys in the meeting, who's an ex-con, carrying an ankle bracelet so he could be tracked,
Wearing
picked up
an ankle bracelet
a knife.
from prison.
Yes, wearing an ankle bracelet that would have signaled to the person that had custody of the technology of the ankle bracelet monitoring whether or not this individual was violating the permitted or prohibited dwell times in a particular geographical area as seen through the eyes of the patented device invented by Jerome Lemelson. So it was a prisoner tracking device. So this guy gets up. Now, what would be totally fascinating, while the police and the BBC are saying this was a terrorist incident, by no means was it was a contract killing by an elite criminal organization that has killed before in not necessarily similar ways, i.e. with a knife, but how about poor Gareth Williams, who was found in a bag in a bath in Pimlico, who's a high-grade British
Before
spy
we move
who'd been
off that,
tracking
David, hang on, because I know you've got a million ideas flowing, and I agree with you, but we're possibly speaking to a lot of new viewers today who haven't seen you before and aren't familiar with a lot of this sort of stuff.
Right.
We're going to go down that road, but I want to point out a few things to you, David. There are actually potentially a lot of new viewers joining us today. Starting last week, the main Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel, which is the Jason Goodman channel on YouTube, it has been experiencing sort of explosive growth, David. Jason Goodman channel on YouTube has 89.1 thousand subscribers. There's been 3,000 new subscribers in the past week or two, which I'm very thankful for. Welcome to everyone who is viewing who is new. But it raised the concern, David, that perhaps this might be fake news, fake viewers. Could be social engineers injecting fake viewers by adding YouTube subscribers. I don't know why they would do that, possibly to accuse me of doing that down the road. We know there are a lot of circumstances where social engineers like to create what you have called, or actually you got this language from a patent, this artificial reality. And so along the lines of this, is it Jack Merritt? Is that his name, the lawyer who's been killed?
Yeah, Jack Merritt.
So along the lines of Jack Merritt being killed on London Bridge the other day, I think this is an extremely important aspect of the incident that I don't want to say it's been overlooked, but it's certainly being handled much differently than it would be if this killer walked up to the guy and just stabbed him on the street and there was no indication that he was a terrorist. Like, there's certain news injects, certain informational plants that have been put there that have sort of moved this situation along. We've heard from BBC and others that there was a report of some kind, that this guy was wearing a bomb vest. The official announcement from the London police, from the British authorities, is that the bomb vest was a hoax. Now, where have we heard that bomb hoax language before, David?
Well, this is a fake news inject, which I'm trying to convey in my new role. Well, it's not a new role, but under my new title, public expert witness. I can, with you, communicate through these people who are appearing, on your YouTube channel, that a method of analysis where I start from the principle, there are no coincidences, right? So when you are accused of injecting a fake news of a dirty bomb at the port of Charleston, that's one of the techniques these people use, right, to discredit you.
Before we go
Because I
there,
believe what
I'm
they're
sorry. I see, because I'm kind of leading the witness here, but I haven't told you exactly what I'm trying to explain. You're onto it. Definitely, this concept of a hoax bomb is what I want to really underscore here. But by introducing this news inject, this hoax bomb, all the police have to say is that they suspected that he had a bomb vest, and they immediately can treat the incident as a terrorist incident. And that gives the police a certain amount of capability that they would not have if this guy was just stabbing people. By saying that they thought he had a bomb, whether he did or didn't, the fact that the police think the guy has a bomb allow them to treat it as a terrorist incident and shoot to kill. Now, I don't know UK law, but I do believe that London bobbies are famous for not carrying around deadly weapons. They don't carry guns. They just have nightsticks. And here we see a situation where the police were authorized to shoot to kill, no trial, no questions. We don't know if this guy did it or not. They thought he was wearing a bomb vest, so they shot him and killed him. But it turns out now that it was a hoax. So the question that I have, David, is, was this a targeted hit on merit? Was it a targeted hit on the tracked prisoner? Or was it both?
both, right? And just going back to the technology that we've established over the time, this would be a classic example of either willing or unwilling, witting or unwitting, BBC directors using that device, which allows them to transmit blocking notes during the middle of a news story, right? Which I believe would have been used to send a signal to the worshipful company of security professionals. Okay, now you come along and kill this guy because we don't want him to talk, right? For all I know, he might have been participating in what he thought was an exercise. You know, so they put a hoax bomb on his back, etc., etc. He's an unwitting agent. He had been in jail, and I'd love to know which jail he was in, but I guess that it was either directly or indirectly under the control of this British company, SERCO, and he was discharged or released, and that would be a classical example of an individual tracked through that Lemelson pattern, and then he was equipped with an ankle bracelet. Now, with an ankle bracelet, I got a little carried away because I had a neighbor about 10 years ago who had a couple of rather dangerous dogs, and he installed a shock collar on the dogs so that when they got to the edge of his property, they got a nasty little shock, right? And so they retreated. And that's one way of controlling dogs or dangerous prisoners. Or maybe not so dangerous prisoners that have been released, but you want them to act as though they are dangerous, right? By stimulating them or giving them a shock when they're not perceived by the public as dangerous. So it gives you enormous control. If you control the jail system and the prisoner escort service, as SERCO does, and I believe it's a criminal enterprise, and it's converted the escort of prisoners in the United Kingdom to a criminal enterprise over the years, you have enormous power because you can shock your prisoners, whether this guy was shocked, if they're not doing what they're supposed to, right? Now, what they're supposed to do, if it's spelt out in that Lemelson patent, is the use of artificial intelligence or expert system algorithms to control the permitted or prohibited dwell time for prisoners in the vicinity of schools, where they might be child abusers, or churches or mosques, in which case they might be blowing or wanting to blow up the mosque. But just think of the power or the danger of delegating to an artificial intelligence algorithm the power to determine the ratio of permitted or prohibited dwell times in a given area. Essentially, and I don't know if you want to go, after that, but as an artificial intelligence expert, I would say, going back to my paper written in 1981, it's absolutely stupid, incompetent, and idiotic, if you will, to actually rely on an artificial intelligence algorithm to determine the prohibited or permitted dwell times of a prisoner in an area, well, inside the fishmonger's hall. I mean, there you've got a whole bunch of university graduates. I'm a graduate of Cambridge University, and I'm not personalizing this, but it just so happens that Jack Merritt is a Cambridge graduate, and Gareth Williams are a Cambridge graduate. Gareth Williams ended up in a bag, and Jack Merritt ended up with perhaps a fishmonger's knife stuck through his ribs, with a BBC camera trained on it, so they would be able to timestamp the exact moment or second, within plus or minus 2 seconds, when Jack Merritt died. Now, that might be very interesting from someone betting on the time of his death. Over to you.
Wait, let me slow you down, David, because I know, see, what's happening is I'm trying to introduce you to an audience here that's unfamiliar with a lot of your research. And I know that's like trying to introduce people to, how to fly a rocket in an afternoon, and it's a lot to do. But there's a couple of factors I want to focus on with this London Bridge incident, and we're getting a lot of interesting feedback from the comments. JLN in Sweden is telling us if you look at the feet of the civilian with a knife on the London Bridge, you see that he has no shoes, only socks. Isn't that strange? And I say, that is quite strange, particularly when we consider some of the points that Ole Damegard has brought forward having to do with the imagery of shoes. The aspect I really would like to focus our conversation on today, David, is this incident and the news reporting in general, because the murder of an individual, in this case, Jack Merritt, would normally garner so much police attention and so much attention from the news if he were just stabbed in the middle of London, that you would think there'd be a very detailed investigation into why this person was stabbed by this other person. It's not like he approached him on the subway and said, "Give me your money," and the guy said no and stabbed him. This individual was chosen by the attacker. The fact that Merritt was giving a speech or attending a conference at the Fishmonger's Hall that the murderer was at is so important in terms of the details of this crime. It cannot be overstated. But yet, the focus of the conversation has been on London's resilience. We've heard that said many, many times. And you and I have spoken about SERCO's resilience training. I failed to bring to your attention during our last show, David, that PDF document that we've always looked at for SERCO resilience training is no longer around. I can't find it. Are there any key words in that you think would help me find it more easily? Because I haven't been able to find the traditional brochure. The one that I see now when I search for resilience is also coming from SERCO, but it doesn't have the same language and the same images and things like that. We know that SERCO is super into scrubbing things from the internet. Agent SERCO contacted the Washington Post to falsely claim that you and I had manipulated a story about Mendenhall's baby, which we did not. And the word Mendenhall has been scrubbed. In a similar fashion, I can't find the original PDF, but I wanted to focus on some of the language. Resilience, right? The BBC interviewed a number of people who had spoken about this stabbing incident, and while I don't want to minimize the death of Mr. Merritt, normally in a big city like London or New York, if a person gets stabbed, every other person isn't necessarily caused to have a psychological or an emotional response. But when the news is repeatedly telling you that this is terrorism, it's happened on London Bridge, that happened again, it strikes me, David, as a psychological trigger. Once we've had 9/11, once we've had October 1st in Las Vegas, once we've been so traumatized by these major terrorist events, a terrorist hitting somebody with a feather would set somebody off. Oh no, more terrorism. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. So going back to some of there's an interesting phrase that might help you find that document if it still exists. I think they use the word media play, right? That is to say, injecting news and media play on the client's network. So what SERCO does at Hawkins under its resilience training program, it borrows the client's networks, for example, or one of the client's networks, which in the case of the United Kingdom Cabinet Office, which uses the SERCO service there, would be the British Broadcasting Corporation's network, which is a Crown corporation. right, paid for by the taxpayer. So I get the impression that today, or sorry, on Friday, SERCO borrowed the British Broadcasting Corporation's network to inject news, actually fake news, and a media play that would get the public believing that poor Mr. Jack Merritt was the target for a terrorist attack, and forgetting or discounting the fact that Jack Merritt was the coordinator of a meeting in the Fishmongers Hall between ex-cons and Cambridge law students who are trying to work out perhaps a new formula for reconciliation. Well, if those two groups were there in Fishmongers Hall, I presume there was a significant number of SERCO agents, or agent SERCOs, as Mr. Marsden likes to describe himself,
Right.
who were participating, I would guess, in a resilience exercise.
That's exactly
Right?
what I'm
Where,
getting at.
yeah, the guy gets out of Fishmongers Hall, and that's the fourth oldest guild or livery company in the City and Guilds of London. I think it dates back to the 13th century or even the 12th century. And of course, the fishmongers would be in the habit of gutting fish. Well, to gut a fish, you need a knife, right? So it beggars belief, except it's totally consistent with these people equipping the livery company that's tasked with snuffing someone with the tools of the trade. So if you want to use the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators on 911, you equip them with the kind of tools that would allow them to fly planes into buildings. But I digress. So coming out of the Fishmongers Hall on Friday, there would be Jack Merritt, who maybe he was going off for a lunch break or whatever, followed by, and I'd love to know what distance, the assassin and apparently some fellow ex-cons. Because I'm told, or I believe that I've read somewhere, that some ex-cons helped restrain the assassin.
Really?
The assassin is wearing, go ahead.
That's amazing. I hadn't heard that. You know, David, we've got social engineers among us right now. It's very interesting for me to observe what they say and do. I want to remind people that there were a lot of participants in Crowdsource the Truth who I thought were legitimate, who at a time were advising me to ignore the trolls or whatever. These trolls, these social engineers, they're watching us very closely, David, and they make comments to try to affect what people think about what you and I are saying. There's someone in here named Brian Ball, who I happen to know. That's not his real name. And I know who Brian Ball is, and I know what he's trying to do. We're not going to get derailed and talk about who Mendenhall is or why Brian Ball and his associates wanted that name removed from the Washington Post, but I do encourage people to tune in on Fridays to David Hawkins' Discovery CSI on Patreon and Subscribestar. They can become sponsors at patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You know, David, it's the first of the month, and every month it's important for people who aren't yet sponsors to visit those sites and become sponsors. Even if people only watch Sunday with Charles, which is the show that we are standing in for today, that show is always free. It's available on YouTube and Periscope and DLive, and it's on Facebook when we're not shut out from Facebook by social engineering attacks. But even that show, free as it is, can't continue without the sponsorship of viewers. See, part of the way we're trying to make a difference with all this fake news that's coming out, David, if we aren't sponsored by a large corporation like the BBC, it's a crown corporation, right? So obviously it's very concerned with what the Queen thinks and all of that. And, you know, SERCO is this gigantic international conglomerate. You've told us how the shareholders in SERCO, the top 10 shareholders, are the same exact shareholders as those in Amazon.com. So the manipulation of the news is an important way that these giant corporations and international globalists, people like the Clinton Foundation and those that support them, this is how they manipulate the news. And it's funny, I still have not found that apparently scrubbed SERCO document, but I found a new one that seems to be describing this technique. They devise a plan, they train a bunch of people, they do an exercise, which in this case could be killing someone on the bridge, maybe killing the guy as part of the exercise to test the resilience of the hospital, test the resilience
or
of
if I may say
lawyer.
so, simulate the killing, right? Where a whole bunch of people are getting trained in responding to an emergency event where there's a simulated killing, but people on the inside of that network can switch through this blocking note technology, digital docking, to actually switching a team in to kill the poor guy.
Well,
And
right.
that's what I think happens.
Yes, and
So
I
they
don't want
run
to
the
imply,
story.
before we go off of this, because there's an important piece I want to bring to you, I don't want to imply that we doubt that anyone was killed on London Bridge. I'm suggesting that it's possible that a plan for training, even if they don't plan to kill someone, could go wrong and could result in a death. But we see plan, train, execute, and then they review. So what are they reviewing? Well, perhaps it was a mistake that this guy was killed, so on their next test they'll make sure that that doesn't happen. Or perhaps that's what they wanted, but the patsy who did the killing maybe didn't know, or whatever. But look at this final graphic, David. What does that suggest to you? It seems to be changing people's minds, twisting them up and pointing their thoughts in all different directions.
Yeah, this whole fascination about discovery on the fly. So I'd never seen that particular image, you see. But if you look at, for example, the artificial reality messaging described in that patent to create and share content on social networks, they talk about artificial reality messaging, which for me is a euphemism for fake news, together with georeference data. Well, I don't want to get too technical, but it does come back to this business of me as a public expert witness, because I think there are very few people who can take the lay public, and I don't want to be dismissive, through an analysis of the patent office, which is the crown jewels for this crime group. The patent office represents how shall I put it, the value of intellectual property in the Five Eyes countries. So it's damn near infinite. You get hold of the patent office, you control the Five Eyes countries. SERCO controls the patent office. Over to you.
So I think I accidentally just blocked someone I was trying to answer. They were asking about the strange videos of the London Bridge. Sorry, if anyone just got accidentally blocked, please send me an email to truth@crowdsourcethetruth.org and I will unblock you. Someone is asking about the strange videos of the attack on the London Bridge. What do you know about the videos, David? I haven't seen those videos, but the whole thing feels very much to me like a scripted event. I was watching quite a bit of BBC News coverage about this after you had called me this morning and initially discussed it. And people are saying it seems like they're walking us into the narrative. Okay, it looks like this is the person. I didn't block them. So Esoteric Ed was apparently talking about the video of the attacker getting up. People are saying the attacker wasn't wearing any shoes. I mean, David, you and I haven't necessarily thoroughly analyzed this. We're just, looking at some of the parts of it that seem to fit into the things that you and I discuss very frequently, such as the fake news injects, the resilience testing, the fact that certain keywords are being used, certain key things are achieved, like saying, oh, there was a report that the guy had a bomb vest. They made multiple references to the fact that that bomb vest allowed them to bring in a special unit of police. So, David, if somebody is doing a resilience test, like let's say SERCO, and they have one of the people who is in their prisoner tracking program, perhaps he's having a difficult time getting a job, somebody like SERCO might offer him a job to be taking part in this training. Look, we've got all kinds of people getting trained. Perhaps these guys wearing the ties are overseeing a guy with an ankle bracelet who goes on the bridge and does something, and perhaps they tell him, you stab the guy, it's a prop knife, nothing's gonna happen, stab him as hard as you can. And the next thing they know, the guy's killed this dude, doesn't even know. The police show up and kill him. SERCO could say, hey, let's call the police and tell him he's wearing a bomb vest. We want to check if the special bomb unit is resilient and ready to act at a moment's notice. And you really could have a complicated method of wiping out multiple people who you don't want around for whatever reason without ever getting accused of murder or murder for hire. You can manipulate all these people to do all kinds of things.
Like on 911 and the 7/7 underground bombing, right? Because the 7/7 underground bombing there was an exercise going on to test the ability of first responders to respond to these kind of attacks. It appears the guys carrying the backpacks with the sort of the firework powder in the back, they were supposed to create the impression there was an attack on the London Underground, but it would appear that someone substituted real explosives for the backpack with the
Right.
the firebomb and whiz bang type stuff, and so the bombs went off, and the agents that were actually being used as patsies were killed. So dead men tell no tales. You go back to the reconciliation or whatever it was that was going on in the Fishmonger's Hall. For all I know, that was an exercise staged by SERCO with a few prisoners who had been tagged and were getting a bit of money, because they hadn't been able to get a job after they were released from jail. So it comes back to what kind of patented devices would allow you to inject fake news or artificial reality messages with georeferenced data into a government network like the British Broadcasting Corporation. Well, it turns out, that patent that we've been discussing at great length for a voice-activated system to generate TV signals that was patented by the BBC on the 3rd of August of 1998, just before the embassy bombings in East Africa, is perfectly suited to inject fake news with blocking notes to send different groups of specialists into a crime scene and get them out again. So I suggest there's a hit team that moves in. There's a snuff film crew, probably with the BBC, that's looking down on the site. So they pick the precise moment when this guy gets the fishmonger's knife inserted between his ribs. And then they call up the worshipful company of security professionals to come and kill the guy so he can't reveal the mystery or the magical play or the morality play staged by the City and Guilds Institute of London. Over to you.
It's difficult sometimes to find these patents. Oh my God, David. Wow. In looking for this BBC patent, I just found something that jumped out at me. Look at the title of this patent, David. It is for steganographically encoded video deriving or calculating identifiers from video and related methods by Jeffrey Rhodes, Digimarc Corporation in Beaverton, Oregon. Well, we've spoken quite a lot about steganographic video, and it gets mocked. Steganography, for people who maybe haven't heard before, is the encoding of messages in plain sight. I was looking for this BBC patent. What we need to do sometime when we're not on air is I need to just make a folder of all the patents and all the documents that we look at frequently, and that way we can bring them up on the fly as you mention them. So there's a lot going on here. People are...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, people are giving us a lot of commentary here. We have a lot of viewers with us today, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. And people who are intrigued by the line of questioning that you are going down, David, can watch us every Friday on Discovery CSI. People can go to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth to see that, where you talk about how these prisoner tracking patents, the patent office is controlled by SERCO. The prisoner transportation is controlled by SERCO. The prisoner tracking technology is deployed by SERCO. This guy was wearing one. There's so many interesting things. People are asking us about the other victims on the bridge. You and I haven't necessarily delved into every aspect of the details of what happened and why on the bridge. And this is not a report stating that something happened on the bridge, informing people about what happened on the bridge. David, you and I are less focused on breaking news. I'm not necessarily interested in having a correspondent there in London the second it happens. We're more interested in observing what the BBC is doing and what other people are doing subsequent to this news coming out. So the guy's giving a speech at the Fishmonger's Hall. Someone who's in attendance stabs him with a knife, which is a tool of a fishmonger. Why would they do that? Is that a message of some kind? I mean...
Oh, totally. Because you see, I believe, going back to the history of the mystery, magical and morality plays that staged in medieval times, going back to the 13th century, For example, they might put a mystery play together where Jesus is crucified. So they pull in the woodworkers or carpenters, right? If they want to show that Jesus is feeding the 5,000 or whatever it was, they'd pull in the fishmongers and the bakers, because the fishmongers and the bakers would supply the props for the mystery play. So, and if people are interested in history, Christopher Marlowe, who some people said wrote the Shakespeare plays, he was killed in a pub in Deptford by being stabbed in the eye. So his father was I think, a cordwainer. So one of the things that I do to amuse myself is, are these guilds and livery companies being requested to participate in the elimination of someone that's inconvenient for the British Empire, right? By being equipped or having to demonstrate they use the tools of trade to kill the targets. So the Guild of Air Pilots and their navigators, for example, might have been tasked with using the QRS-11 gyro chip to take out various targets in the United States on 911. And it so happens the Grand Master of the Guild of Air Pilots and their navigators, now called the Honourable Company of Air Pilots, is Prince Philip, who gave way to Prince Andrew. Now, as you
What do
know,
you mean
it's been
gave
in the
way?
news a lot. Well, he gave way. He's no longer the Grand Master of the Guild of Air Pilots and their navigators, where he was there for 50 years, I think. When he stepped down from that position, he handed off the role of the Grand Master of what is now called the Honourable Company of Air Pilots to Prince Andrew. And as you know, Prince Andrew has been targeted by that Epstein pedophile entrapment racket
Right.
in the hands of one Ghislaine Maxwell. So
Now,
we
this
know
is
that,
interesting, David.
yeah,
So
there
wait
he
a
is.
minute. I want to ask you something. So you're suggesting that the British Crown wants someone out of the picture. Let's say it's a pesky lawyer at
No. Let me just
Cambridge.
jump in there.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in there? The British Crown doesn't want anything. The British Crown is a structure and an organization at the head of which is the Queen and ultimately the King or whatever it was, who have an absolute right to be informed, to advise, and to consent. If you deprive her, that's Queen Elizabeth II, or the future king, which will probably be Prince Charles, by not informing them, they can't consent to anything. Now, what's happened, I believe, over hundreds of years is the Crown Office has been delegated. And let me just pop in, I'm not showing off here, but there's a Latin phrase that is very important, which is something along the lines of delegata potestas non potest delegare. A delegated power may not be redelegated. If the Crown delegates the power to go and whack someone, the individual who's been authorized to go and whack someone can't delegate further down the power to whack, right? The power is supposed to be returned to the Crown for consideration. What's happened now is that basic Latin dictum or mantra is being violated. I think the British Crown has now been subverted, and many of these people, like Prince Andrew, will be victims of child entrapment and blackmail. And I think we will find, when we dig deep enough, they may have done something bad, but the great majority of these people have walked into a trap. Over to you.
So the thing that I'm trying to get some clarity on here is we've got, I mean, is there some sort of coded messaging going on? I'm very interested in this concept of they're transmitting coded messages. That makes a lot of sense. They want to do things that they don't want people to know about. They want to take advantage of email and the internet and public postings of things that can travel around the world instantly, but they don't want to put out a message, hey, by the way, we took care of that lawyer guy. Now, we don't know that much about this guy Merritt. He's in Cambridge. We know there seem to be a lot of spies coming out of Cambridge. You've spoken about the Cambridge Five. You've spoken about the Tizard mission. We know we had Cambridge Analytica. I mean, you went to Cambridge. I don't believe that you're a spy or that you interacted with spies there, but it seems to be pretty well known that there are some spies coming out of Cambridge. And here we've got this guy, he's a lawyer, he's interacting with these prisoners at this event at the Fishmongers Guild. If there's potentially something that he's doing that whoever is in charge of clandestine whatever at Cambridge doesn't like, taking him out would be something that they want to do. Now, are you suggesting, David, that he's stabbed with a knife after a meeting at the Fishmongers Guild because the people who know that they want him dead will then realize, okay, the Fishmongers took care of this? Is that sort of a message marker kind of thing?
The fishmongers would be a unit, like in a play, like a mystery play, where they come in because they have a good knowledge of fish. So if they want to do the parable, you know, where Jesus fed the 5,000, isn't it? Where he had the bread and the fish to feed the 5,000 with. If that goes back to a medieval mystery play of the 13th or 14th century, you'd bring in the city of London, if that's where the play is being put on, the fishmongers to bring the fish and the knives. If you want the carpenters to build a crucifix and nail Jesus to the cross and put that in front of peasants who are illiterate, this is a very powerful method which has come right through to modern times, except with modern technology, of giving the public an image to bite into and mislead the public from the reality behind the stage or behind the curtain. So now what I think is, and this is a useful theory, I believe, when you're analyzing this murder of Merritt as a crime, is wouldn't it be interesting if Jack Merritt discovered that the prisoners that were being tagged electronically by SERCO, right, were being used in an international crime syndicate, right, to track targets, either with pedophile entrapment or blackmail or whatever, and ultimately kill the ones that might blow the whistle on the holy grail or the crown jewels, if you will.
I don't want to go too far down the road of speculation of why something might have happened. I'd prefer, if we could, David, to just look at what's occurred and what we're being told. To me, the most interesting aspect of what's going on right now is BBC's reaction to it, how they're presenting this, you know? I mean, again, I keep thinking, if this guy were at a pub and he walked outside the pub and somebody stabbed him and killed him, all the police attention would be on why did this guy kill the lawyer, particularly that he just left a meeting that he was at. That's not random. That's definitely a targeted killing. And I don't think there's enough attention being placed on that. In fact, I think categorizing the thing as a terrorist event would immediately put it into a category where perhaps they won't even investigate that. They're going to spend all their time. The main message that was going out was that this will result in more police. And they said that, you know, they weren't adequately surveilling this guy. There were certain things that they said that sort of set off red flags in my mind that made me feel like, rather than this being a police investigation of a lawyer being murdered by an ex-convict, this has become an exercise in how they're going to convince everybody that they need more surveillance and they need more police, and the police need to carry guns so they can shoot people more easily, and you need to be more afraid of terrorism and things like that. Because truthfully, and again, I'm not trying to minimize these crimes, but in terms of a person being stabbed in a city the size of London or New York City, it actually is quite irrational for any individual person to observe that and become scared that they might get stabbed. Because the statistical likelihood of any one individual being randomly stabbed is so low that it's essentially an irrational fear to walk around worrying about getting stabbed. But if they can repeatedly have any crime be linked to terrorism, they create this artificial reality that terrorism is around us, it's happening all the time. It's something that these social engineers have spoken about, David, this strategy of tension. If everyone is always constantly caused to be very, very tense, it's quite easy to cause them to snap, right?
Well, and you end up by controlling society, because you control what society believes, and society believes what it's been programmed to believe through artificial reality messages and fake news and media plays.
Yes.
And I believe that it's taken perhaps hundreds of years to get the public, obviously embracing and endorsing and adopting the new technologies, communication technologies come. It's taken hundreds of years to move from the medieval mystery plays or morality plays or the magical plays, right, to modern times where an attack on the Pentagon, on 911, or the stabbing of this poor guy on London Bridge is seen as a demonstration that out there's a whole bunch of really evil people, but we can't name them or identify them, who get mobilized to bring down London society or the United Kingdom. And like you said, you need lots more surveillance to anticipate this. But it's pretty pathetic that they can't protect this guy from walking down London Bridge, tracked by a guy wielding a fishmonger's knife in front of a camera wielded by the BBC. Over to you.
Well, there's something else very strange about it, David, that you mentioned that we haven't spoken about on the broadcast yet. The guy had some kind of tusk that he had taken from inside the fishmonger place. What was that all about? What's he doing with a tusk?
No. The guy, I just can't. I'm trying to visualize what would have been seen through the eyes of the BBC camera crew pointing down on that bridge, because I think I sent you on Skype the image where it's got BBC News on the bottom left, and then it's grayed out or sort of fuzzy on the left and the right, and then the center is a picture presumably on the precise spot where Jack Merritt got a fishmonger's knife between his ribs. The question I ask is, when did that camera start rolling? Right? So did it catch Jack Merritt moving across the bridge? And I'd like to know why he left the meeting. Was he going for lunch? Yeah, there's the. Now, isn't that an extraordinary, you from your cinematographic point of view, isn't that an interesting image? BBC News on the left, fuzzy on the left and the right, a highly focused thing. The center, I would guess, of the camera, if there were some crosshairs, would probably be about where Jack Merritt got a fishmonger's knife between his ribs. So when was that camera crew in position? And what were they using by way of blocking notes to move the various players into position? So was Jack Merritt followed by the assassin or the alleged assassin, and followed by some guys carrying a narwhal tusk that was taken from inside Fishmonger's hall and used to restrain the alleged assassin? So, I mean, it's like I don't know, a medieval mystery play that we're being presented. Well, no, we're not seeing what the BBC showed to its domestic or its internal audience, but I'm very, very confident that what we're looking at here is a media play by SERCO. Over to you.
Well, I agree with you, David. Let me point out a couple of things that I observe. I've come to realize that you like my observations of photographs and video in media. So what we're presented with here is a vertically oriented video, which indicates to me that it was either taken by a mobile phone, which does not seem to be the way that a BBC official video would be oriented, but this was either taken by a mobile phone, or they want us to believe that it was taken by a mobile phone, because this has become a standard way of presenting mobile phone video. We've got the vertically oriented video in the center, and then in order for it to fit the landscape orientation of a normal television, they zoom in on the image and blur it out. You can see that this edge here corresponds to the edge of the building, which, David, coincidentally gives this the visual feeling of a film, because these windows look like sprocket holes when they are positioned on the edge of the frame like that. And I think having it repeated sort of doubles that subliminal suggestion that we're looking at a piece of film. It's very reminiscent of the Zapruder film, which many people have seen with its sprocket holes, and also just seems to be some kind of subtle suggestion that what you're looking at is filmed evidence, it's real, you can't be fooled by an image. But I mean, to me, David, this looks like a lot of traffic on the bridge. We certainly can't see enough detail to make out the face of any suspect. We can't even see if the people shown here are male or female, attackers or attacked. Can't make out their clothing, their hair, or anything. This is essentially a useless image for anything other than determining that there's traffic on the bridge.
A traffic jam on the bridge. The bridge, if I understand correctly, this is taken after the stabbing or the alleged stabbing. So the traffic has been halted, right? But in the other direction, it actually looks like they've blocked the traffic.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that cluster of people down on the bottom right is around the body of the victim. What I would like to know is, when did the camera start to roll, so to speak? Did the camera, the BBC camera crew and the director, were the BBC newsreaders being fed with this prompt, and the blocking notes were being sent by the director to get the various units, like the security professionals, to come into play at a particular time and then exit the crime scene. So, as you say, the way it's been staged, there's an excuse or an opportunity for the BBC director to call in the security professionals and kill the suspected assassin
Right.
on the basis that dead men made no tales. Now, the assassin is supposedly have been restrained by a narwhal tusk. So I have difficulty in imagining what you're going to do. It's a nasty, pointy type thing. But as far as I know, it came from the Fishmonger's Hall. So was there a little team of people hired and paid to set up a simulated murder on London Bridge to see how quickly the forces would respond, including prisoners? So
Wow.
how many prisoners? Sorry, go
Wait a
ahead.
minute. This is so bizarre. So I just looked up narwhal tusk. I don't know what this website is, but this thing here called DW.com is telling us that the London Bridge attack, Poland honors narwhal tusk wielding hero. So someone with a tusk stabbed the attacker? Is that the idea? Polish national
Well,
went after the
restrained
London
him.
Bridge attacker with a 1.5 meter whale tusk. That's huge. And received
Yeah.
a medal for
Yeah.
courage. Where did he get this whale tusk?
You got it from the Fishmonger's Hall.
But it doesn't seem like something you could quickly get to attack the guy with. I mean, what is he, Fred Flintstone, attacking people with a whale husk?
Well, you see, that's why the directors of these staged plays, they're living in Never Never Land. What is it they say? You can fool some of the people, all of the time, and all the people. You can't fool all of the people all of the time. Look at it. I mean, this
So
guy.
they're spraying him with a hose and stabbing him with a meter-long husk? It's bizarre.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's a fire extinguisher, which may have come from the hall, because why would
okay.
you be walking along London Bridge with a fire extinguisher and a narwhal tusk unless you were a little unit in the film?
A fire extinguisher I could imagine coming off of an emergency response truck, but a whale tusk doesn't seem like the type of thing that would just be
but
around.
how many emergency response trucks are there around when this guy? So certainly the narwhal tusk, to the best of my knowledge, came from Fishmonger's Hall. So this is a classic example of a little mystery play or a magical play, right? Where the public is fed with this kind of garbage and the terrorist police come in and, I don't know, kill a few people and London sort of shuts down.
David,
But,
you're going to love
basically,
this. More steganographic messaging from our favorite birdcage liner. So the Washington Post is already telling us that the narwhal tusk has a wondrous and mystical history. A new chapter was added on London Bridge. So is the intriguing
So it's a
tooth.
mystery. It's a mystery play.
It is. For
Staged
centuries,
by,
Europeans
amongst
sought
others,
out
the
the
Fishmonger.
unicorn horn, the long and straight tusk of the Arctic-dwelling narwhal whale, for its perceived magical and curative capabilities. On Friday, the tusk did indeed wield a historic force, just not in the way the queens and kings who once collected this twisted and tapered ivory likely imagined. Instead,
Can you
as
just
the
stop
deadly,
there, right?
yeah.
So, the Polish chef grabbed. You've gone past it now, so I can't. Just go back up a bit. Right, grabbed the nearest arms he could find for self-defense. I mean, how many narwhal tusks are there on the London Bridge?
And how would
Right, that can
is
be
it just like
grabbed
sitting
by
there?
Polish-
How does he get it? You'd think a narwhal tusk would be mounted and not that accessible.
Yeah. So I'm begging the audience in my role as, a public expert witness, and I believe you share that same role, because we've got the court of public opinion. We'll have a very intelligent group of people listening. You have to, not me, but I can explain one of my theories. You have to explain how come there can be a murder or murderer and a murderee, the victim, on the London Bridge, and someone, a Polish chef, right, who might have actually been working on the lunch arrangements in Fishmonger's Hall. How come he's equipped with a narwhal tusk to restrain the alleged assassin? I mean, it's absurd beyond belief. So what I'm saying is the
It's
mystery
absurd.
play or the news is basically consistent with the BBC's witting or unwitting use of various social networking systems that can assemble a whole group of people, actors doing totally bizarre things, and inject a theory of terrorism into the news in London, when in fact it's part of a criminal organization that's engaged in blackmail and extortion of leaders, whether London City or whatever it is, around the world. Over to you.
There's a lot of commentary coming in that I don't quite understand just yet. People are coming back to the key phrase, very good boy, narwhal. I don't know what that means exactly. Wild Creature is telling us that there is closed circuit television footage available that's quite interesting. So this is going to be another thing that you and I will continue to explore every Friday on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. It's really interesting to me, David, that you months ago come up with this theory, this hypothesis having to do with these mythical plays from the London City and Guilds. And here we have the Washington Post talking about this mystical, mythical, magical tusk. And we've got a guy taking one out of one of the honorable, worshipful companies of the Guild, the Fishmongers, who seem like the guys who would have this tusk, and he's stabbing a terrorist with it. So that's unbelievable. Hey, look at this. What's this little Ukrainian tent up there? That's the color of the Ukrainian flag, right outside the Fishmonger place on the bridge.
Well, I don't know about that, but that's one of the more imposing buildings of one of the wealthier livery companies of London. That goes back to the 13th
forensics
century.
Tent.
Yes, probably. But I just find it so entertaining that these people should have exploited the tradition of the livery companies that goes back 800 years for staging magical mystery and morality plays. And the only thing that you need to do to adjust is change the technology so they can do this in real time and transmit the essence of the mystery play or the magical play or the morality plays. You're all bad because, I don't know, you're ignoring global warming, etc., etc., and periodically we'll kill you where we find you. It's a criminal organization. It is not a terrorist organization. And the organization with the brains and the facilities and the resources behind it is the British company SERCO, which, unfortunately for the United States of America, runs your patent office and your National Visa Center. Over to you.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, David, so people are wishing that I were putting all the things together with what they're trying to tell me. I mean, it's impossible for me to take all this input in real time. We've got 800 and some odd people who are watching us right now, David, and I'm trying to conduct a conversation with you, look at the things over here. Yes, and people are noticing a yellow pyramid on top of a blue pyramid. I mean, right now we're just sort of in a mode where we're observing things about this incident, laying down some information for people to come back and check out. We can look at these comments after the fact. This is something, David, that you and I will be talking about again and again. I'm curious to know more about the other victims. I'm curious to know more about the relationship between the murderer and the lawyer who was stabbed. Curious to know what this lawyer was into. He obviously is interacting with these prisoners. What was the purpose of this conference at the Fishmongers Hall, David?
I think they use the term reconciliation, right? Where I believe this would be easing the transition of prisoners through the prison system into, public life, if you will, maybe finding them jobs, etc., etc. And somehow or other, the Cambridge law graduates, and I intend to be in contact with my former colleagues in Cambridge early next year. What I think is absolutely fascinating from my point of view is I happen to go to Cambridge, which has more of a tradition in engineering and science, as opposed to, Bill Clinton at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, where he gets kicked out in 1969, and he does philosophy, politics, and economics. The key behind this, and that's where I believe I can serve the public as a public expert witness, is whenever these kind of theories are being put out for our consumption and belief, you have to ground truth the theory. Right? Ground truthing means if you look at a guy wielding a narwhal tusk on the bridge of London, where the hell did the narwhal tusk come from? at what point in this transition did he think that, did he rush back to Fishmonger's Hall and realize there was a guy killing people on the bridge? So he grabbed, a weapon from the Fishmonger's Hall. If I'm beside someone who's getting stabbed, I'm not going to go back and pick up a narwhal tusk in the Fishmonger's Hall. I'm probably carrying it with me for whatever reason. And so why wouldn't I whack the guy over, I don't know, the hardness of a narwhal tusk? Maybe that's a personal question for narwhal, right?
Well,
Right.
people are
But,
saying that the tusk was hanging behind the door at the fishmonger's place. I mean, you've got to really kind of embrace a lot of coincidental circumstances. The going back and retrieving of a tusk, it just seems staged, David.
I think that's what had happened. I think there were a whole group of well-meaning people, including Cambridge law graduates and ex-cons, who had been told, let's stage an exercise and see if you have a future career in, I don't know, with the BBC or putting on special effects or training in resilience. So there's a little retinue of people going across the London Bridge, one carrying a narwhal tusk, another one carrying a fire extinguisher, and the fellow carrying a fishmonger's knife, and this guy, Jack Merritt. And suddenly, instead of a simulated exercise, which is what I suppose SERCO should be doing and is doing all the time, it switches from simulation to live fire. It's captured on a BBC television camera. It's pumped out through the news. And we're injected with a myth, right, that now gets the world focused on these hidden memories, this mysterious or magical enemies that we describe as terrorists, but it's a diversion from actually an elite criminal enterprise that I believe basically fleshed out its techniques in Vancouver starting in 1996. Over to you.
So people are telling me in the comments, David, that deep staters have been tweeting about narwhal pup, and the dog is saying a very good boy. So I mean, again, I don't have all of this information, but it's coming to us, and we can start to talk about it some more, and we can explore this further on Discovery CSI on future episodes. But I think we're all sort of in agreement that this narwhal tusk appearing in this incident, and particularly being in the video, seems like another element of steganographic messaging, where just the fact that the tusk is involved, it sends a message to someone. So David, I want to close on this idea, because you raised an extremely important point in our last episode of Discovery CSI that I didn't get a chance to address. A lot of people are criticizing me for interrupting you, but you and I having a conversation is like dueling fire hoses shooting at each other. So I sometimes forget what I wanted to say, but you introduced a concept and a term last time that I think are extremely important beyond just the elements that you and I have discussed and researched on Discovery CSI. You spoke about, in the context of Vancouver, where you live, and the Picton pig farm, where there was all that reporting about the horrendous murders that took place there. You and I have spoken a lot about StarNet Communications having visited 425 Carroll Street on my trip to Vancouver. We actually saw the place. You pointed out the amazing coincidence that Bernardine Dorn was standing in front of a mural that bore a striking resemblance to this really bizarre painting on the building at 425 Carroll Street, which a member of the downtown community told you and I was some sort of a warning. We don't know for who or of what, but we do know that when the RCMP, the IRS, and the FBI raided the building here at 425 Carroll Street, what they found was a $900 million criminal enterprise that was creating child pornography, adult pornography, and running an online gambling business. So that's quite a warning. You had created the term, David, that they had created a victim farm, that the entire downtown east side of Vancouver, there was no reason, or rather no motivation for the authorities to address the horrendous homeless situation and conditions down there, because it created a farm of desperate people who could be victims, who could be targets. And I offer this idea, David. Is there not a larger victim farm where people like this guy wearing the ankle bracelet, he's a prisoner. If he was wrongfully imprisoned, perhaps he's a victim of a corrupt justice system. And once he is a victim, well, he's desperate. He wants his freedom back. Through this Lemelson patent, he can be upgraded or downgraded in terms of how he's treated now that he's tracked and he is a prisoner of this victim system. I have also observed, David, that the social engineers who attack me, who attack you, who attack this program, who attempt to attack guests, legitimate guests who come on this program, they attempt to infiltrate my organization with operational plants and various people who try to get me to say or do things or try to make it look like I have said or do things. It seems like they want to get someone in the position where they are a victim. I have suspected for a long time that the purpose of these lawsuits is not actually, I'm talking about the lawsuits against me, not actually to relieve some injury, but to put me in the position of being a victim. They want to take all my money. They want to introduce certain process crimes so that I'm in danger of going to jail, because I feel that once they have someone in my position, someone who can have guests like you on the program to share these ideas with the viewers, if they could convert me into a victim and force me to do what they want, they could get me into the same position as this guy on the bridge, maybe, and get him to stab somebody. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's a good concept. So maybe we should be thinking about the externalization of the victim farm concept in the downtown East Side, starting in 1996, and turning it into a virtual or a global victim farm.
Yes.
Where people are being entrapped through the use or their use, witting, unwilling, whatever it is, of hardcore adult and child pornography. Now, I don't want to alarm or upset the listeners, but just think, if you look at Bernadine's Dawn background and her seminars on torture paradigms and practice, if a whole community of people wanting to take up a profession in the medical area go into the University of Chicago hospitals and they're forced to participate in a late-term abortion of a woman who ultimately dies on the operating table, under the camera. So at the end of the day, those innocent young people, and that's upsetting me, are actually trapped because they would rather die than have anyone expose what they did to the fetus as it came down the birth canal in order to get it out of the patient, if you will. Now, I believe that was what was happening in the torture studios of Starnet Communications. And in fact, the murders and a record of a snuff film as content for that international network, the victims' bodies, including the child's, were taken out to the pig farm to be disposed of in the food chain. Now, that's a theory, but it is consistent with perhaps, again, a steganographic clue. One of the punk rocks bands that used to play out at the pig farm was called DOA, Dead on Arrival. So maybe the pig farm has been set up as a decoy where the killings didn't take place. What took place at the killings where the bodies were chopped up, they found body parts in the fridge, used in cannibal feasts and fed into the food chain. And that's a horrible thought, but there it is. What I'm not begging, I'm asking our listeners to understand that there's very few people, and I'm not being arrogant, who can trawl around the patent office and in their minds clip together complex patented devices, like that prisoner tracking system of Lemelson, and put it together as a virtual machine. And maybe that explains, maybe that will be used to reverse engineer a global or a virtual victim farm, where maybe there's 1 million people out there who are victims of pedophile entrapment and blackmail, and they're never going to tell that to you, but they're looking for an opportunity to open it up. So again, my role, I believe, is now, I'm calling myself a public expert witness. I don't need to go into court to be considered credible in areas of the applications of artificial intelligence algorithms to turn prisoners into killers. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, David, I think we've covered what we know about this for today in terms of pointing out some of the strange connections to the City and Guilds of London and that Fishmonger thing. I think there's a lot more for us to discuss, but we're just about out of time for today. Was there anything else you wanted to cover? I know you've got someplace you got to go.
Yeah, sorry. No, just if I can be sort of as a public expert witness, I'll die happy. Well, I don't
Very
intend to
good.
die, but I think that's a proper role for me. Over to you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all the people who were tuning in today, expecting possibly to see Charles Ortel. I hope they have enjoyed this special episode with David Hawkins. They can see more of David by going to his website, which is reversecsiscripts.com. You can also support David by going to his Patreon website, which is patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. It is the first of the month, and there's always a very precipitous decline in sponsorship. So if people are not yet sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth, please join us on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth or subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. David will be back next Friday, and we'll discuss this and other topics in full. If anybody heard anything today that they were confused by, who is Mendenhall? What are we talking about? Tune in every Friday. David, I'll see you then. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Jason. Bye now.